I think the best way to say it is to love the problem, not your solution, right? And is to focus on that and not what you think needs to happen. I came into it as a technician, wowing them with how much I know. Unfortunately, that's not the type of communication that really gets eyes glazed over. Why do you have a lack of funding? You had money and you didn't spend it wisely. They have a certain amount of money. They want more of it. Everything else is BS. They don't care.
Welcome to the Entrepreneur's Logbook podcast. I'm your host, Zachary. You can find me on social at It's Zach B. In each episode, I bring on experts from various industries for you to learn about their strategies and insights driving extreme business growth. The Entrepreneur's Logbook podcast is sponsored by WeFeaturePR, where we're dedicated to helping entrepreneurs build their thought leadership in business by booking them on podcasts and launching their own podcasts. Today, we're joined by Stephen Morel, founder and CEO of JurisDeed, an AI-powered platform that simplifies tax-lien investing for everyday investors. Stephen is a real estate attorney with over 20 years of experience, who previously founded a successful title company and served as chief legal officer at Civic Source. And then in 2019, he launched JurisDeed to solve a major problem in the tax-lien investing world: the overwhelming complexity and legal hurdle that keep most people from accessing these investment opportunities. His platform uses AI technology to automate the entire legal compliance across 50 states, making tax-lien investing as simple as managing your retirement account. Stephen, it's great to have you on the show. Welcome aboard.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Stephen, one of the things I always love to ask with anyone that comes on our podcast, as it is an entrepreneurship business podcast, and I know you've obviously been running JurisDeed for a little while here, and you've obviously founded multiple successful companies, is I'd love to hear, if you had to restart your company from scratch, knowing everything that you know today, what's like the one thing that you would do differently that you feel like a lot of entrepreneurs get like totally wrong?
Yeah, that's probably one of the most important questions you can ask, right? How many startups fail because they don't actually get to that point of realization. So for me, it was approaching the entire opportunity, which is to, obviously to solve an unserved problem, right? Or an underserved problem that people want to pay you for. And for me, it would be really leaning into the customer journey first before thinking about anything that you believe in your mind is the problem that you want to solve. I think the best way to say it is to love the problem, not your solution, right? And is to focus on that and not what you think needs to happen. And secondly is to develop your storytelling capabilities. Most people don't start out knowing how to tell stories, and I don't mean Mickey Mouse Disneyland stories, although they all follow the same story arc. It doesn't really matter, but it's really just about a matter of communicating your idea to others. But it doesn't stop there. It's communicating others to get them to take a certain action. It could be as simple as passing the word along to somebody else, or as serious as getting venture capital to invest in your company, right? It all comes back down to being able to articulate in simple terms, what is this all about? And the hardest part for me personally in this journey was the fact that I came into it as a technician. I came into it as someone who had spent all these years doing it myself and really getting buy-in from clients by wowing them with how much I know. And that which wasn't an ego thing, but it gave them confidence that they could trust that I would do it. Unfortunately, that's not the type of communication that really gets eyes glazed over. Yeah. It doesn't get buy-in from a high level.
No, but I love the fact that you mentioned like knowing like the problem, like knowing what your customers want, because in the end, there's so many people that start a startup like, oh, I have this amazing idea, people are going to love it. And then you realize in the end that you created this entire product that no one actually wants to use or anything like that. You use all this capital, all this time to build something. So it seems for you like being big on like market research, better understanding your consumers, customers, and everything like that. And then for you, I mean, you've been in this space like 20 years before you even started the company. So you had a big advantage, like knowing really deeply what your customers, clients wanted. And then you were able obviously to create something that was tailored to what they were looking for. And we'll touch on to that a little bit more because I want to hear it from your own words, but from the storytelling too. You're able to convey that in a very authoritative fashion too, because you've been in the space for so long, and that really helped you guys like quite a lot from what I could tell here. I love that.
Yeah, it's Yeah, it's awesome. And it's taken a while. I'll tell you that. It hasn't been easy. The best thing that we had going for us is that we had made sure that we had some revenue along the way, because that's ultimately what brings too many journeys to a halt too soon is the lack of
Yeah.
funding. But that's a consequence, right? Like, why do you have a lack of funding? And some of it's beyond your control, but a lot of it is because you you had money and you didn't spend it wisely, or you never went out and got enough people to buy in, early adopters to start paying a little bit. It's some kind of misstep along the way, or it just took you too long. It took you too long to get to the point where you could get a bigger buy-in and start to bring on partners that also wanted to go all in on this thing. And because you can't do it all yourself, because you need help, you start to need to grow. And if you can't get there, then you might just burn out. Yeah, it's great. One other thing too on this before we move on, being that I think a lot of people come into startup ideas as a technician, right? It is a very common path. And I think the first thing that you think in your mind is, wow, all this experience I have is as the provider, right? Which is on the solution side. And it's not that you don't understand your customers or you don't care or you don't have empathy, but you just, most of your time is spent on delivering something that they asked you for. And it's usually in a much more micro granular context than in the big scheme of things. That is really what they're after is, and I'll use an example from our company. One of the many steps that we take to bring value to our customers is digitizing things that were previously analog or static or in paper or that kind of thing. That's not what they're hiring you for, though. That might be one of the steps we do, but it was something that was really meaningful to us, because it's painful to internally deal with paper and having to retranscribe things 3 times or whatever. They don't care about that. Understanding who your customer is and why you're even relevant in their world, right? In our world, these are investors. They have a certain amount of money and they want more of it at the end of the day. They see this as a vehicle for which to get there. It's as simple as that. Everything else is BS. They don't care.
That's exactly why you have to understand really like what they want at the end of the day, because you just end up building stuff for you because you're like, oh, this is great. They're going to love it. And your consumers, investors, et cetera, have no desire to even use that in the first place.
Right.
So I love that. And just like going back to JurisDeed, because I know we touched on it like a little bit, but I'd love to really understand. Could you walk us through like, how do you guys work with clients, customers? Like when someone comes to your platform, they're looking to invest in tax-lien or distressed properties. What's the journey from start to finish? And how does your like technology somewhat simplify like that very traditionally complex process?
So it's a great question. So for right now, we're in fairly closed beta. We have a handful of early adopters that have become essentially customer partners of ours, which is another great way to learn. And so their journey is they acquire these assets at tax sales, which happen around America in every county and city in most states every year. And it's a delinquency, again, delinquent tax bill all about the property to the county. And if it's unpaid, the county needs that money to survive for that year, tantamount to paying for basic public services. So instead of going bankrupt, they offer it up, if it's not paid by a certain time, to an investor to pay it for the delinquent person with a promise of interest and other security rights. It's very similar to a mortgage which is much more common, as people understand. A bank is going to lend you money and you're going to pay it back. And if you don't, that they might have to take your property back. The whole reason they get to do that is so they can return their investment. The bank or the lender is stuck because it's in real estate, it's brick and mortar. And the only way to get their money back is to liquidate it. And so liquidity becomes this big, massive end goal that has to happen with all of these assets before they can realize what was their goal, to end up with more money than they started with, right? But it has to be liquidated. But when something is delinquent and in distress or unpaid, et cetera, whether it's tax or mortgage, it touches on the legal system. It has to, in property rights and due process and everything. And so if the goal has these barriers from acquisition to liquidation, and some of those barriers are state by state, different sets of laws and lawyers and legal mumbo jumbo. Okay, they're either going to navigate it themselves or they're going to find someone to help them with it. And in today's day and age, it's much more efficient, as investors are figuring out, to streamline their operations, outsource more of it, don't have big teams of paralegals and title researchers and people who send mail and letters and everything like that. It doesn't make sense. And that's not why they got into it in the first place, right? That was just a pain they had to go through to get to that end result. So what we help them do in simple terms is we help them navigate from acquisition to liquidation, this asset class of delinquent taxes, so they can realize greater returns with greater efficiency than they were able to do by themselves. And we do that we say nationwide, or some state that we don't operate in every single state, but the whole idea is that this process transcends state borders, which means different sets of state laws. We've normalized that. Previously, investors who were at the enterprise level or mid-market, or they were had capital deployed in many different states, they had to figure all that out themselves. And not only that, but it brings like a lot inconsistency there's different vendors in every state. So they have people to manage people.
This is a mess.
It gets crazy. So we are a single platform where it does not matter where the property is located. It's a process. And when a licensed professional in that jurisdiction is required, we have that handled. When you need to have a different action taken because that state requires it versus the other state, we have it handled. You just need to monitor the progress and the performance of your portfolio. So it's an asset management platform for tax liens nationwide, which has never existed.
Yeah. And I was just going to ask you about that. Like, different state means different laws, which means this is probably like an entire mess when you're thinking about like enterprise, like middle market, like companies, like they have to deal with so much. If you have just one state, I mean, you have the same like state laws, they might change a little bit. It's like you're more familiar seeing vendors and everything like that, but 50 states, that's a lot of ground to cover, to put it very simply.
And so what's interesting is that we've learned so much from working at the enterprise level, right? Where what it did is it created the opportunity for us to scale up a business that could transcend these state borders and give all the existing or potential investors downstream from that, as small, medium-sized partnerships, the opportunity to have access across the board, across the state lines, where it doesn't matter where they're located, it doesn't matter where the property is located, and it doesn't matter if the rules are different. It's simply a dollar in, dollar out rate of return opportunity that they can now take advantage of.
And I'd be kind of like curious, because I feel like we've somewhat touched onto this, but when someone like comes to you, what's typically like the main problem that they're trying to solve, that your platform help with? It's like mainly like just the complexity of needing to manage all like the legal and everything like that.
A lot of it is all in the same bucket. It is because our solution is fairly novel in the sense that you haven't been able to outsource this to anybody before. Like, not the whole thing. You've been able to go outsource the lawyer in that one state, or the letters, the legal notices to be mailed out, or the title, all these little micro steps. They've been able to piecemeal it here and there. No one has said, what if you just show up and say, help?
The
whole thing. And so we're also to educate the customers on the existence of this solution. Not that we're a better version of the other guys who did this last week. And it's a real thing. And I say that with no ego. It's just a matter of, if someone has to blaze that trail. And so we have to inform and educate customers that, hey, yes, this is true. This really exists here. And then when they stop and think about it, it's, wait a minute, I could do that too. I can switch gears and not have to be an investor, right? What you really first signed up for. Yes, you can literally worry about how much money are you deploying this year? What are your returns like? How are you communicating with your own investors? Like, strategic moves rather than managing the process. And that's not been a possibility before from an end-to-end standpoint.
And one thing I'd love to touch on, because you've been obviously in this space for a while, you've been pretty deeply involved in like the legislative changes for like tax sales across like a lot of states, specifically in Louisiana, where I believe if you even like co-authored some like updated like property tax law, if I got that correctly, where you're like pushing for like major reforms in 2026. And one thing that I'd be like really curious to learn is, how do you even stay ahead of these? There's always like new changes. Like, what should investors know about these shifting like legal landscapes that perhaps could impact their investment strategies?
It's a different question at this point in time than most times. There's a lot going on right now. over the longer history of over the past 30 years, it hasn't changed all that much. It doesn't change all that often either. It just happens to be right now, there's a lot changing all at one time. And that's a byproduct of a US Supreme Court case law, which of course then controls what happens in all the 50 states. As a matter of course, what's happening is a few years ago, a monumental case came out that really changed the investment from being something that was an interest return plus the potential for an equity bump, an equity gain. And it changed that to just an interest return. And so when these investors have modeled this process and what their expectations are, and probably people giving them money to invest for them and that kind of thing, they've had to rethink this. And now states are scrambling to say, oh, wait, hang on. Our process doesn't comport with what the big guys up there in Washington told us to do now. We got to go scramble and change this now. And so it's a matter of staying ahead of it. But then states end up in between these milestones of massive like federal changes, which probably happen like once every 20 years.
Yeah.
Seriously, it's not that volatile. But in between those, you have a lot of opportunity for these little micro changes that might mean that you thought that it undercuts your investments because you didn't know about it, and it knocks one of your cases out and you lose a lot of money.
Yeah.
But just like right now, there's a big, huge why now answer for us. And there's another case coming out this calendar year, that might even be bigger than the one 2 years ago, depending upon how it shakes out.
With all these little micro changes, they can compound to obviously having some sort of an impact, even if it's not like a major like changes that are going on or anything like that.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
Directly to the bottom line. And again, let's come back to the most basic premise here. That's what what's the rate of return of your portfolio, whether you have 5 Tax-Liens in your portfolio or 50,000. How am I doing in a performance standpoint? And these changes of laws can absolutely impact in a dramatic way if you're ignorant of it, or if you're not very competent to comply with it on a regular basis. It can undercut what you're going for and bring your days of investing in this to a premature and unfortunate end.
And one of the things that I always love to do with this show, because we try to keep it actionable, like insightful for anyone that listens, typically entrepreneur, business owners, investors even. And that's one thing I want to like touch on. So for any tax-lien investors, whether they're getting started or they've been at this for a while, is there maybe a 2-3 bullet points, whether like advice or things that you would recommend them to do to improve their strategies, or perhaps to start looking into to get ahead of the game when it comes to their investing strategy or like diversification strategy? Anything like that?
Yeah, again, it comes down to current times. Right now, the most important thing is to figure out ways to mitigate this big change, which is from the Supreme Court case a couple of years ago, which fundamentally changed the potential of how much to make from this investment, and also how. And it's going to be hard to keep up with the returns, to actually achieve desirable returns, if you don't take some steps to mitigate, to offset that. So what do I mean by that? If you can't get that big equity piece anymore, and that let's say that drops your rate of return 5 points, then what happens? That may not be sustainable. But if you can reduce your costs by 3 or 4%, now all of a sudden that loss doesn't look so onerous and you can keep going. How do you do that? Well, maybe outsource to a company that can streamline the whole thing for you, and you don't need to pay a team of people to manage. Yeah. Maybe optimize the speed with which you can create liquidity in with these assets that are ready for it. Or sometimes you can shake the trees a little bit smarter by using intelligence to track down people who would pay the delinquency, which means you liquidate it and you get your return, if you knew who they were and could track them down timely enough, right? And so using intelligent actions rather than a spray and pray or just the bare minimum, taking actions like that to offset some of that loss makes it not you now become ahead of the game, because everyone else isn't going to be doing those steps. And now you are leading the charge as far as the highest rate of return that's possible given the current legal landscape.
I love it. Stephen, really appreciate you coming on the show, joining us and sharing your insights here. And one of the things I always love to ask is if anyone wants to get in touch with you. I know you obviously have your main website, JurisDeed.com. You're decently active on LinkedIn. I think you may be trying to start pushing more content on there, but
it's going to be a whole different story in
I love it.
26. So we have a full we actually have a marketing department that has we were preparing for it the last few months of last year. And now we have a whole weekly strategy. We're going to be on LinkedIn constantly, YouTube, lots of actionable videos. Everything we do is going to be for free. It's just going to be actionable, but just value add. There's so much to cover that we want to just convey that, hey, we're here. There's a lot of trust that's to be built to trust for someone to say, hey, this company can help us reach our financial goals, our wealth building goals. Who are they? What do they know? What are they about? We're excited about embarking on this. As I mentioned, on the platform standpoint, we're still in closed beta, but we'll be launching a larger MVP version of the platform to more customers in the second quarter of this year, and then hopefully a full public launch by the end of this year, where we can become effectively the Robin Hood of delinquent property debt as an asset.
I love that tagline, the Robin Hood. That's a perfect one. Great. You heard that, everyone. If you want to learn more, head over to JurisDeed.com. You can also find Stephen on LinkedIn. It's going to start to be more active on there. And then to your listeners, if you've enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast. You can also find more insights at wefuture.com. Until then, keep pushing, and we'll see you in the next one.